Throughout the history of chess, the World Championship match has always been a spectacle. Usually it's just the amazing chess that gets played, but sometimes there's some controversy involved. For example, in my video on the 1978 World Championship match between Karpov and Korchnoi, there was cheating accusations about chairs, blueberry yogurt, hypnotists, and so on. But the World Championship match in 2006 between Vladimir Kramnik and Veselin Topalov was quite something. First of all, this was a period in chess where there were two world championships because the title was split, so this was going to be a reunification bout. And second of all, there was a massive cheating accusation involving a toilet. That's all I'll say for now. I'm going to take you through the story of the match, some of the best games, the controversy. Let's get into it. So Kramnik won the first game of the match with the white pieces in a game that was 6.5 hours long. Kramnik's got a very positional, grinding style with kind of a systematic opening approach. Topalov is much more known for tactics and for complications, so it's very much a clash of styles. We kick things off in game number 2. Topalov plays d4, d5, and Kramnik was electing to play c6, which is the Slav defense. And the whole point of the Slav defense is that after everything comes out, Black can either play e6, the semi-Slav defense, or take the pawn right away and try to hang on to it with moves like b5. Which is why White plays a4, preventing that, and now Black just develops normally with bishop f5. e3, e6, bishop c4, bishop b4, castles, knight d7. Black can also castle, this is one of the lines, but Kramnik chooses knight to d7, queen e2. And the standard setup here for White is the fact that, well, Black's moved two pawns. Black has moved one of their center pawns away, so I'm going to reinforce my e-pawn and play e4. And oftentimes Black is more than okay giving White the center and just lasering in with the pieces. So the idea, for example, if bishop takes c3, bc3, and for something takes on e4, for example, there are lines where White will play this bishop out, and since Black does not have a dark squared bishop, Black will never get to castle, and White's position is known to be pretty good here. So Kramnik doesn't do that, he instead castles and begins to attack with bishop h5. Topalov plays e5, knight d5, trades, and plays queen e3. The idea being that he's unpinning himself, the center is closed, and he is going to begin some sort of active operations that way. We have bishop to g6, knight g5, rook e8, and if you want to begin an attack on your opponent, probably a good thing to do is to launch some pawns. While you can attack with some pieces, it's basically impossible to break through to a castled king, so that's also very well protected unless you pawn storm, and we have a pawn storm beginning. Kramnik trades off and plays the move f5, so he's blocking the queens. Taking on h7, plays the move f5. Now, Topalov could en passant here. He could play ef6, but then there is knight takes, and the pawn is guarded, and he has nothing. So instead, he plays bishop to e3, and king h1, preparing potentially to launch all the other pawns. This is kind of, you know, let's get the beta out of there. He's got to hide on h1. The king really doesn't want to get involved in the action. He wants, you know, doesn't want all the smoke. And now we have rook to c8. g4, queen d7, rook g1. All right, we have a game plan. Now he plays knight back to f3. Again, he's on the verge. He's on the verge, and Kramnik's really under pressure. Kramnik, however, plays rook c4. He is completely uninterested in the attack that's developing here. He actually just doesn't trust Topalov at all. So rook g2, pawn takes, rook g4, and rook takes a4. I mean, you gotta give Kramnik some props, man. This dude is on the other side of the board here, just like, yo, bozo, you just hung a pawn. What are you doing? You got no mate. Now, if you are Topalov, do you take the rook or do you not take the rook? Of course you don't take the rook. Hey, what are you doing? Your rook needs to go help the other rook. You gotta get to g7. So we have g6. I mean, this move is more or less forced. And now, well, Topalov has one pawn remaining, so he plays h4. He's the only pawn that he hasn't pushed on that side of the board. Rook b4. Meanwhile, Kramnik is just, you know, the dog in the fire meme. This is fine. This is good. Meanwhile, Topalov is about to melt his face off. And Kramnik doesn't get queen b5. Let's trade queens. Now, of course, you don't trade queens, okay? Do not trade queens. If you want to start a successful attack, do not trade the queens. And, I mean, my man Kramnik hasn't moved 4 of his pieces. He's like, yeah, whatever. I'm up 2 pawns now. H takes g6. Okay, queen sacrifice. Because, I mean, not really. If you take, then g takes h7 leads to a beautiful win. For example, king takes h7. This is not mate. That's not mate because the bishop takes. Don't do that. But you have check. And every time the king walks up here, for example, you can force the king to walk up. You have f5. and you will promptly mate this king via ladder mate. Okay, so very nice idea here to sacrifice his queen. That's not how the game ends. Kramnik finds this move h5. If Kramnik had taken back, for example, with the knight, let's say, there is this incredible queen sacrifice. Queen g6, here, king must go here, otherwise it's mated on g8 and g7, and king h7, white to move, the absolutely beautiful backwards kill shot, and that's it. White is down a full queen, but it doesn't matter, mate is coming on the h-file. Okay, great. So Kramnik plays h5. Topalov, meanwhile, lurches forward with g7, sacrificing his rook, takes, and we have bishop takes f8. Now, that actually proves to be a fatal blunder. Kramnik should have played king takes, because when the queen infiltrates and takes away your squares, you have the absolutely ludicrous move, queen to e2, creating some counterplay, and even though I can, like, take and prevent you from taking my knight, Black defends everything here with probably the most savage defensive move I've ever seen in my life, although really Black has nothing else. It's just really hard to see this from a distance. Bishop g5. A square that is protected literally by every important piece that White has, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it just kills White's coordination enough. For example, if you take with the pawn, you no longer have queen g8. For example, if you take with the knight, you get mated in 1. For example, you take with the queen, you get mated in 2. So, yeah, bishop g5. Kramnik instead is a human being and plays bishop takes f8. Topalov plays queen g6, which is wrong. Apparently, he had a very easy win here with rook g4. And maybe he didn't see what to do after king h8, but he just has rook h4, and if the king goes back to g8, like, he has a mate coming. Like, I'm not sure what he missed. Maybe he missed that after this, I don't know, bishop g7, there's queen c7, and maybe after queen f1, he forgot that every square is covered. Like, this queen cannot check him. He blocked. I don't know. I didn't ask him. But he plays queen g6, and now this allows Kramnik to cocoon, and he's just in time to sack his rook, but create enough chances for himself, right? It's crazy. So all of a sudden, Topalov has to back up, and his attack is stopped, because now Kramnik is a move away from winning himself. A rook c2, and it actually turns out that Kramnik is a genius. Look at this important move, check. Force the king up, then take the rook with check. And by the time the dust settles, it's actually Kramnik who is playing for a win. Kramnik has 2 pawns up, those 2 pawns that he got a long time ago. And, you know, Kramnik is a daredevil, did not get mated. And even though, look at this, look at Topalov pushing. It actually, these pawns don't mean anything because actually he's completely covering. And the A pawn over there is actually very much threatening to promote. So Topalov must sacrifice, and he ends up pushing through his pawns. But at what cost? We now have rook and pawn versus knight and pawn. Now, this is a draw, according to table base, which is the finite computer set algorithm, whatever you want to call it, which has solved chess, basically. If there's 6 pieces on the board or 7, any position, it will tell you the evaluation, and this is apparently a draw. And it was apparently a draw for the next few moves until this moment, when Topalov needed to play king d7. King d7 to prevent this king coming in, and then push, and then some sort of, you know, this pawn apparently can be stopped via checks, but instead, as chess would have it, on move 55, he gave a check, and because the king got too close, Kramnik was able to hide the king on c8, prevent the d pawn from coming forward, like this, and now the b pawn is moving, and this is the wrong coordination. The king had to be here, and not on c8, and Kramnik won, because he played rook e3, and that's it. He cuts the king off, which is not something that would have happened if the king was able to hide in front of the pawn. The pawn is coming, and he's just winning. So Kramnik takes a 2-0 lead, and I will just edit that. Kramnik takes a 2-0 lead, and their next 2 games were drawn. And this is where the controversy began. So the match is 3-1 in favor of Kramnik, and it's a best of 12, which means that the first person to win 6.5 in the classical chess portion wins the match. Between the rounds 4 and 5, there was a day of rest. You could rest, chill, whatever, do some more prep. And the team, the manager of the Bulgarian chess team, and namely Veselin Topalov, filed a complaint that Vladimir Kramnik was going to the bathroom too much. This is the historical news article on ChessBase. It's to the organizing committee. It's everything that I just said. And it's quite literally a camera indication. So essentially, we have the restroom where each player can go to and lay on the couch, grab a snack, and then beyond that, there is a bathroom. And the bathroom is the only place that doesn't have cameras. And they were saying that they saw the cameras. They somehow got the access to the videotapes of Kramnik in his room, and they filed a complaint to stop the use of the restrooms and to use the public one. Now, the way this works is that each player, whether they are white or black, have their own bathroom. They leave in that aisle, okay? They don't just have a bathroom for the whole tournament. They have that restroom whenever they are playing that color. Okay, so understandably, this caused quite a stir. Not just in the match itself and the players, but all over the world. This was a massive accusation. This was the man who took down Garry Kasparov when Garry Kasparov was at his peak. And they actually, the organizing committee did shut down the private bathrooms. At least for that round, Kramnik protested. And here it's quite unclear what happened if their appeal did not go through in time, but Vladimir Kramnik did not show up for Game 5. He forfeited. And the match was now 3-2. At this point, the president of FIDE, Kirsan Ilumzhinov, flew in to Elista, which is the city in Russia where the match was being held. And they negotiated tooth and nail. They ultimately decided to open up the restrooms. Now, of course, Kramnik also said that he wanted them to rescind the result as the match went on. Maybe they would just replay that round. They did not do that. And so Kramnik said at some point during the match that if it turned out that Topalov would win, he would sue FIDE. Now, during these few days of deliberation, literally a massive security entourage came and took down the walls of these bathrooms to see. And then they were giving insane security detail to both players, scanning every little thing. They had to take off their shoes. Kramnik said it was more intense than being at the airport. And the other story that came out of all this was that in one of the bathrooms, they found some sort of cable. They said that the cable was in one of the ceiling tiles above. And this became a whole other separate issue. Oh my God, there's a cable in the toilet. Somehow this must correlate to this accusation. Here's a clip of what Kramnik had to say about this cable.
And I would like Mr. Danailov to explain how it's possible to make use of this cable, even if it's there. First of all, as far as I understand, it was hidden behind the ceiling. So it means that I, or Topalov, would have to, to come with a special device and to make a hole in the ceiling before each move, to take it out. Then, if you don't have a computer with you, it has no meaning, this cable. I mean, how can you use it? So you need to bring a computer somehow.
Okay, so obviously this is completely insane, but the match ultimately does resume. After we finish the games, I will tell you the epilogue and some of the final points, but there is a timestamp if you want to skip ahead. Here we go. We're actually going to pick things up in round 9 of this match. It is now 4-4, so Topalov has won a game since it being 3-2, and then there was two draws. And again, we have d4. Now, throughout this match, we kept having d4. Like, I think 95% of the games were... I think actually every game played was d4. And then maybe like 80% of the games were Slavs by Kramnik. And again, this time, we don't have knight c3. We have Topalov playing e3. This is actually known as quite literally the quiet variation. Because in many lines, you play bishop e2, and you just don't let black take on c4 so easily. But black does get the bishop out. You see, that's the difference. Is that in this way, you kind of have a reverse London by black. I'm sorry, but queen b3 now is not so strong as it normally would be in some other variations. So we have knight h4. This is a very common idea. This is actually arguing that the drawback of putting the bishop on f5 is that I will win it. And here we have this variation. Here, white can advance in a variety of ways, but Topalov plays in a very strange way. He plays a3, which prevents the bishop from coming to b4. Then he plays knight d7, then he plays g3, and then here he plays the move f4. This sequence of moves is so odd, and it's designed to just suffocate black. Like, black's pawn breaks in the Slav have to do with taking on c4, c5, b5, e5, maybe in some lines g5 if you can somehow... kind of succeed at it, and we see this, and then Topalov just breaks all the principles that we know of chess and puts a bunch of pawns out, and it's up to Kramnik to figure out how to deal with this. So Kramnik plays b5, b4, and kind of instigates there, and Topalov just solidifies the center and castles, and now we see Kramnik playing this move e5. But what do we know about a person that has two bishops? They want the position open. They want the center open. And when you are positionally slightly worse, you have to rely on dynamics, and Kramnik is trying to do that, but he will end up with this weakness, this weakness. The knights just have no forward movement, and Topalov just puts a very solid center, attacks the queen and kicks it out, and just moves his queen. And like, for example, if you take on d4 and I take back, yeah, like my pieces might be a little delicate in the center, but you have no move. If you play something like knight b6, yeah, I'm hanging here, but I can just back up. For example, just go to f2, for example. I mean, I'm gonna play e5 next. That's weak. That's weak. Look at my wall here. I mean, you're just not breaking through it. And so Kramnik took on f4 and went to b7. But for the remainder of the game, it was really Topalov just focusing on the center. And Topalov just has a massive set. He doesn't trade bishops. When you have an advantage, a spatial advantage, you don't trade. You have to make the advantageous exchanges, even if it means returning your bishop to passivity. And now we see Topalov showing why he's kind of this very dynamic player. e5, look at him just restricting Kramnik's movement. Kramnik's, kind of scrambling backwards, trying to find a way to activate, but he just can't. And finally, this coordination is the perfect one. You see c6 is going to be a serious problem. And Kramnik takes on c3. Kramnik didn't have to take on c3. He could have played knight e6 and kind of focused here, but it really wouldn't have helped necessarily. I mean, even Topalov can play a move like d5, and taking is just death. Taking is death because bishop is hit, queen is hit, not to mention f7. This is all very delicate whenever I decide to attack you. So Kramnik takes on c3. We have bc3. You would think rook c3, but no. bc3 is good. Now your center is indestructible, and for the remainder of the game, you can either focus on the pawns or really choose wherever you're going to be attacking. And Topalov, as you can tell from his play, focuses on all three sides. He has pressure here, 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 down the middle, and on a7. And ultimately, Black's position just capitulates because the pressure is overwhelming. And whenever you have just such a weakness and such a dominant spatial advantage from one party, there is always a tactic at the end of it that breaks down the position. Rook f7, if this, there is this, and the kill shot, bishop to e6, pinning the queen. And okay, you can say, well, I'm not down that much material. You're down enough that in a world championship match you will lose with white. Maybe in a Guess the Elo episode somehow here white plays, I don't know, queen d5 and hangs the queen two different ways, but something tells me that's not going to happen. And in the game, we got knight d5, and rook came back to f3. Topalov is up a pawn, and not to mention he will just avalanche these pawns down the board. I'm not going to lie, this was his most convincing victory of the match. He takes a 5-4 lead with just rounds 10, 11, and 12 to go. And it's looking like he's just going to be the world champion. But just as the match itself featured drama and controversy, the chess, ladies and gentlemen, in this match was absolutely unbelievable. After this defeat, it was 5-4. Kramnik sat down in round 10 and played a very nice game of chess. He won, and it was very convincing, and then the players calmed it down and drew their next two games, which means that it's now 6-6. In World Championship matches, when it's tied 6-6 after the Classical, I mean, there's been many formats over the years, but you have to play rapid chess. 25 minutes per player, 30 minutes per player, essentially is what it's known as, but 25 minutes with a 5-second bonus time or a 5-second delay, depending on what country you're in. In World Championship matches, they generally play bonus time, where you get the time added on. Now, it's 4 games, so each person gets a game with white and 2 games with white, 2 games with black. The first game was a draw, and the second game, Vladimir Kramnik won with the white pieces. So now he's up 1.5 to half. And meanwhile, there's still chirping going on at the press conferences throughout this. I mean, it wouldn't be done without controversy. They were saying that Kramnik's play was matching up to, one of the top engines at the time, Fritz, and Kramnik was firing back saying, that's fine that I'm scoring these percentages, but actually Topalov scored even higher percentages in San Luis in 2005. And that was the tournament that actually crowned him as the world champion. Back then they had these tournaments. So, one side is saying that Kramnik's games are really high accuracy. Kramnik, meanwhile, is saying, well, how did Topalov even make it to this match? His accuracy was even higher in this tournament that happened before this match. So, all sorts of drama and chaos. It's 1.5 half. And here, ladies and gentlemen, is the conclusion of the rapid portion of this match, and ultimately, who will become the world champion. Topalov once again begins with d4. It feels like every game that we've looked at has seen some sort of Queen's Gambit. We have knight to f3, knight to f6, and again we go back to the quiet variation. Knight h4, and now bishop to e2. So we are not taking yet. Also, Topalov is not playing this kind of wacky setup, assuming that Kramnik is going to be well prepared. Knight d7, castles, bishop d6, and g3. You notice that we are delaying this, and he's delaying this because he actually wants Kramnik to castle. That's what he wants. This bishop's not going anywhere. It actually literally can't move to any square without getting captured in some capacity or booted back to g6. So the opening continues to go on until Kramnik basically realizes that he can no longer do much, and he plays castles. Takes, e4. Okay, great. Everything that we want. Now, Kramnik must play e5. If Kramnik even waits for one more move, well, actually, that's stupid because there's a fork. But for example, if Kramnik plays bishop c7, what is missing from the puzzle that we saw in the last game, ladies and gentlemen? It's the move f4. And again, Topalov will get this dominant structure, and it will be very bad. So Kramnik plays e5. But Topalov plays f4 anyway, because takes, and he says, hey, is this going to give you PTSD, buddy? I'm going to play e5 and continue to mow you down the middle of the board. Here we go. King g2, getting off the diagonal so we don't lose our queen. Queen d3, queen c2. Okay, great. Bishop d4. We want to take and take. So what do? Push the pawn out of the way. Knight d5, and here Topalov plays rook f3, holding the c3 square. Knight takes, pawn takes, some structural damage, bishop c5, and now the players start bringing their pointed hats and their crowned hats. The bishops and the rooks are now in the center of the board. Bishop d3, queen e6, bishop c1. A little bit of shuffling going on. And here, the setup that Topalov has taken on looks like he's trying to go that way. Over here. Nah, he's trying to continue to do what he did in the other games, which is attack on the king side. f5! A big move. If you take en passant here, then you lose your rook. Now, you succeeded in en passant, so Anarchy Chess is happy, but you're down a rook. So I guess our chess is happy. Queen e2. King f8, rook d1. All right, we're trying to figure something out here on the d file. It's not so clear. I mean, I'm waiting for something to happen. But listen, nowadays this move happens in the first 7 moves of the game. Back then it took 28 moves, but we have the move h4. Again, opening up another front of attack. Now Kramnik begins some sort of fighting back. He brings in his knight. You can't take it because I take your rook. Rook h1, the knight is all jumping around, hitting the queen. Queen e2, queen d7, rook comes back. There's nothing that can be done. And Kramnik plays b5. Whoa, is Kramnik playing this for a win with black? Uh-oh. We're going to have a new world champion? And Topalov says, maybe not so fast. g4, a seemingly impossible move. I mean, what to do? You take and you go, but wait a minute. I have tripled isolated pawns. What the heck? It's like the 3 little piggies. The wolf is just going to go straight down and blow all their houses down. Or is he going to sacrifice another pawn to activate his dark squared bishop? Uh-oh. Kramnik is scrambling, but this bishop is worth more than this rook. So we just play e6. Why do we need the rook at all? You only take the rook later if you're going to take it. Bishop f5, a stunning move. If you take on d1, bishop g6, e7, and then I take it, I make a queen. So he can't, and that's, by the way, that's everything that happens. I mean, you can argue that maybe that he didn't have to take on d1, but what else was he going to do? I mean, if he takes on f5, it's rook it's rook d6. So rook d1, all of this happens. Queen gets sacrificed, and we have this position, the most important move, bishop d3. You can't let the rooks see each other. You gotta put them in separate rooms like game theory, and they're gonna tattle each other out. Rook a1, queen b2, queen e2. Don't repeat, queen g4. We're going for it. And queen e6, and the light squares are gonna be the death of I almost called him Karpov, of Kramnik. And in this position, after b4, h5, the final line of defense will be extracted. You can take, but I will play h6. And that's it. I can even march on through. There is nothing you can do. If you take on h6, you are mated in a few moves. And it's 7.5, 7.5, and it all comes down to the final rapid game. Here we go. d4, d5. And like I told you, we had a lot of this. It was a Slavic event. I mean, I kind of almost feel like one of them should have just pulled up in an all Adidas outfit and squatted outside with a black BMW. You know, but Topalov really likes the semi-Slav. Okay, he likes e6. He doesn't actually take on c4. So e6, e3, this is known as the Miran. The Miran with knight d7, bishop d3, sometimes white plays b3 if black doesn't take, black can play here, or take and play b5. A lot of ideas here, we get exactly that. Bishop e2, bishop b7, castles, bishop e7. And you can already tell this is very different than what Kramnik does with black. Kramnik's bishop is traded for a knight. He has a very solid structure. He relies on pawn breaks. Topalov really likes to instigate. b4, e5, both knights are hanging, absolute chaos. We take a knight, we take a knight, we take a pawn, we take a pawn, pawn break. Topalov trying to solve his problems with dynamics, and Kramnik plays the move d takes c5. He's basically just trying to call the bluff. If you take on c5 with the knight, which is what happens, we have check, the king has to move, and we get this position. And computer evaluates this as 0-0-0. But Kramnik is the master of being an absolute mechanic and technician. He takes advantage of every little thing that's wrong with your position. First, he plays knight d4. And here the computer gives the absolutely ludicrous king to g8, just moving out of the way of everything and then moving on with life. And Topalov is a human and retreats his bishop one square instead. Rook d1, a6, and he's trying to kick out the bishop and solve his problems with dynamics. He wants bishop e7, king e7, he wants a trade, but Kramnik finds nice ways. He plays rook b1, which seemingly blunders a fork, but in fact that would lose because I would take you with check, and then I would take your bishop. For example, if alternatively I played rook b7 first, that looks good, but you would take my bishop. Now then you can, continue to paralyze me. My king is not in a very good position, but Kramnik is this master of these kind of little moves. Okay, bishop e4 attacks my rook, so now we trade, and you can go ahead and take my c3 pawn, yes please. But you see, Topalov is just falling behind a little bit. He's gonna be a move behind kind of the duration of the game. And here there's a really nice move that Kramnik plays, which just makes it very annoying to beat Topalov. And he plays the move knight b3. And here's the thing, if you take on b3, I will play a b3. I've now connected my pawns. Most likely you will lose a6, and then I will have two connected pawns and I will push them and you will lose. That's most likely what's going to happen. The alternative is you can play king e7, and your a6 pawn is weak forever. Now I will play rook here, kick out your bishop, c4. And you are just one move behind. For example, you play rook d8 trying to trade everything. I got bang, you gotta take like this. I got bang, you gotta take like this, rook a6, two pass pawns. You're really gonna play me? Down two pawns that are passing? Really? That's what I'm saying. Kramnik is really good at this stuff, so he plays rook c6, but then we have takes, takes, takes. And Topalov, once again, is relying on dynamics to solve his problems. So Kramnik plays rook d1. Let me just stop everything you want. Let me just stop everything you want. Sometimes it's the ugly but necessary looking move like rook a1. How are you gonna get my pawns? And now it's time to make a little luft for my king and protect against your rooks. Rook a3 to protect against the infiltration. Rook b3 and a4. And I'm ready and I'm going. Rook b5. Bye-bye. Bye. Can't you feel your world championship slipping away? This is what you get for accusing me of cheating. Yeah, the slow positional torture, and now my king comes. And look at this, rook takes c5, rook c5, king b6, the idea. In between moves, Zwitch and Zug, rook b7. Boom. If you take the rook, for example, I take with check, I take, and I queen. And if you don't take me, well then I have an option. It's a buffet of rooks that I want to take, and the game is over. And Vladimir Kramnik wins the 2006 World Championship match, winning 2.5 in the rapid portion. Okay, so if you made it past all that, you're probably like, what the hell did I just watch? For a good reason, because that was absolutely insane. So a couple of final takeaways. Obviously, this was a crazy and pretty unsubstantiated claim that a man who was going to the restroom a lot would be using some sort of assistance. Kramnik also elected not to sue anybody because he barely won the match. I don't know what history would be if Topalov had won this final game, but I don't want to know. Topalov then went on to do an interview with a Spanish newspaper where he said that he had, he had threats made against him, and all this other jazz, and Kramnik will never admit that he cheated, but it's actually funny because then a counter investigation was launched. Remember I told you about San Luis? That actually Topalov might have potentially been involved in his own cheating scandal and had accusations hurled at him in the next year of 2007. And to this day, the players do not shake hands, at least not that I'm aware of. They have not ever, I don't think I've ever seen some sort of article where they came to terms, and so I will end this video by showing you several clips of Topalov and Kramnik awkwardly sitting down at the board against each other and not shaking hands. It's the most hilarious and awkward interaction, and actually in the FIDE rulebook, you must shake hands before the game. But I guess there's some, they are above the law. They, because of their history, they don't actually need to adhere to these things. Anyway, I just want to give you a little bit of appreciation for watching until this moment. Thank you. And if there's anything that I haven't covered or some historical event, do let me know. I'm signing off. I will see you in the next video. Please enjoy these clips.
I believe that he did terrible things in Elista and he's still telling awful things. So, okay, I mean, as long as he continues, I mean, for me, he doesn't exist as a human being.
Now my rival is Anand. Of course, I'm thinking about the match. So.
And you will play him on Tuesday here.
I didn't know. Thank you for telling me.
But you don't think that they will ever be civil again?
I don't think so.
So they are only meeting in official tournaments or in tournaments where both of them want to play very badly.
Yeah.
There they are.
All right.
Now they carefully have to ignore each other. They are probably trying to break another record of not looking at the opponent, looking anywhere but at the opponent. And but they are very experienced in this. We had them at the Amber tournament in Monaco, where both of them wanted to play very much.